control of Rafah, even if it leads to a potential breach with the United States. How will you convince an ally that knows there won't be any serious consequences, even if it ignores U.S. warnings repeatedly?
President Biden has been very clear that a major ground operation in Rafah would be a mistake and something that we can't support. Hamas can be effectively dealt with without a major ground operation in Rafah.
Very interesting. So the former ambassador, Ron Dermer, who you spoke with, who still has a position in the Israeli leadership, is basically saying, we're going in, and we don't really care what the President of the United States says.
It's not, and the thing is, it's not just Ron Dermer. What was interesting in our conversation on the podcast, what he said, which I saw when I was traveling around the country the last couple of days, the position of the government is pretty reflective of where the country is. The population, if you go from right to left, ideologically, politically, religiously, everyone in the country seems pretty committed, pretty hard-headed, that Israel will be a fraction of itself if it does not remove Hamas full stop. And you can't remove Hamas full stop without going into Rafah. That's where 4 of the main battalions still are. Hamas battalions are still intact there. There are, speculation that some of the leadership is in Rafah. You have to deal with Rafah. Now, Minister Gantz, who's a fierce political opponent of Prime Minister Netanyahu's, and there's a lot of personal animus between Netanyahu and Gantz, but he's also in the emergency war cabinet. And he said last week, telling Israel that they can't go into Rafah is like telling a fire department to go put out a fire, but stop at 80% and leave 20% of the fire still burning, and then just leave with the hope that you won't have to deal with the fire again. But as you know, if 20% of the fire is still burning, that fire is going to come back, and it's come back bad, and the fire department's going to have to return. Israel's saying, we're going to deal with Hamas. We're going to deal with Hamas once in this war. We're not leaving 20% of Hamas to remain intact and continue to pose a threat to Israel. So that's their position, and they're saying, the U.S. has been very supportive of Israel to this point, but at some point they may have to part ways.
So is that questioner correct when they basically say that the reason that our close ally Israel feels that they can go forward with this, despite the fact that the White House is pushing back against it, or at least wants it to be done in a very strategic and precise way, if that's even possible, is because they don't think the White House there won't be any ramifications for Israel for going forward?
I think what they see with the frontal assault in the press that the Biden administration and that Senator Schumer have launched against Prime Minister Netanyahu is a sign that they know they cannot stop Israel. And they know that Hamas can't remain intact and that Israel probably does have to go into Rafah. They know it'll be controversial with the progressive base in the United States. So they're looking for a way to have a confrontation with Israel that's separate from the policy. So they're having this public fight with Netanyahu, kind of using Netanyahu as a foil while recognizing at the end of the day, Israel's going to go into Rafah and the U.S. isn't going to stop them. And that's just kind of where this thing is going to end. And so I think they get the fight with Netanyahu personally that serves their domestic politics, and Israel will still go into Rafah.
Fascinating. Dan, thank you very much. Dan Senor joining us today with a very volatile situation. And I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of politics and a lot of showmanship in some ways.